Sorry. Hey, everybody. We were just chatting, and I'm glad that everybody here could join us. I'm here with Charlotte Clymer, who runs the Substack Charlotte's Web Thoughts. But more importantly, before we get into the conversation, I have been such an admirer of yours, Charlotte, for so long.
Thank
We have,
you.
yeah, we have a friend in common who I basically stalked to say, you need to hook me up with Charlotte Clymer because
Oh,
I need to talk to her because you are truly, I think, kind of a unicorn in on this side of the fight in that you are an incredible communicator and you come at this from about 25 different perspectives. I mean, you're a former military person, you're from Texas, so you're not
mhm,
a good, Northeast liberal like me. You are a trans woman, and you are, as I said, just an incredible communicator, somebody who really knows how to talk to everybody on every side of the issue. And I say that as somebody who's been following you on social media, and you address the
mm,
trolls just as respectfully as you deal with everybody else. And so I just thought that people would benefit from your wisdom. And I'm somebody who writes a lot about the Democratic Party and our failure, in my view, to really be able to communicate properly in the last several years. I wanted to get your thoughts. So thank you so much for joining me for this chat. And I know that people are going to be able to get a lot out of you. Before we get into kind of the global issue with everything
mm,
going on, I wanted to talk about something that happened today
mm,
because I found it to be appalling. And I don't know, actually, I haven't talked to you at all and haven't followed you today on social media as to what you said about it
mm,
because I've been swamped. But for people who don't know, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who's very clearly running for president, in a few years, and somebody who has, I think, made some inroads with different factions of the Democratic Party, somebody who prides himself on going into the lion's den of Fox News, where I used to work very often, and talking to people on every side of the equation, including Sean Hannity, for which I don't begrudge him. If you remember, he did a debate with Ron DeSantis in the middle of this last presidential election, which I thought was kind of odd when you had two real candidates running, but
yeah.
whatever. But he did something today, Charlotte, that I thought was just very odd. He went on Charlie Kirk's show, and Charlie Kirk is not just some Fox News, that would be bad enough, but
Oh,
he's not just some Fox News radical. Charlie Kirk is, a bigot and a liar and a
mhm,
hater and somebody who does not truly wishes ill upon people who don't agree with him. It's not just that he's somebody who has a differing opinion from yours and mine.
that's right.
Yeah, and said stuff about the trans community that I thought was just gratuitous. Like, if you want to have a real debate about women in sports and trans women in sports, and you come at it from a thoughtful perspective, I don't begrudge you if you are much like I don't begrudge people who are pro-life because I while I don't agree with them, I understand where they're coming from.
Right.
I don't necessarily agree with him on this issue, but I understand where you're coming from. But to me, he kind of you tell me, I think he kind of gratuitously went after the trans community to score political points with, I guess, the Charlie Kirk faction of the Democratic primary electorate. Like, I'm trying to think who in the Democratic Party that's going to be voting for Gavin Newsom to be the Democratic nominee is like, you know
Mm.
what? Now that he spoke to Charlie Kirk, I think this is my guy. Like, what do you make of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, Julie, thank you for having me on
Yeah,
tonight. I've been a big admirer of yours for a long time, especially Lift Our Voices. I mean,
thank you.
you've been such a great advocate for vulnerable people across the spectrum, and just it really is a treat to be able to be in conversation with you. And also to all of you watching, it's been a long day, and I did not put on makeup or professional clothing. I just decided to go casual, so I apologize for not looking my best,
You
but
look great.
thank you. I appreciate that. Um, you know, the thing is, when it comes to trans kids in sports, there are, I think, a lot of people in this country who don't know any trans people, who don't know a lot about trans healthcare, and they have fair questions. They have fair concerns because they've heard a lot of propaganda that didn't make much sense. That, from their perspective, and I would say from my perspective as well, because I share that perspective with them, we grew up in areas of the country where we were taught in sixth grade biology that there were only two sexes.
Yeah.
We were taught that biology is a binary construct in terms of DNA and genomes and whatnot, and that there are men and there are women. And so I understand that. I get that. And I don't begrudge the tens of millions of people in this country who have understandable concern or confusion on this issue. My beef is with Gavin Newsom for knowing that trans people do exist, for knowing that the transports issue is a massive right wing fraudulent campaign of propaganda that is meant to divide people, that is not based in reality, that relies on, I would say, data that is at best threadbare, and at worst is deeply cynical and intentionally hateful. And it feels as though Gavin Newsom, even though he is well informed, and I guarantee you he's well informed on this issue, he has decided, since he wants to run for president in 2028, that in order to reposition himself as palatable to conservatives and a lot of moderates in this country, the trans youth are the easiest community to throw under the bus in order to support his own political ambitions. And that's all this is. Now, if Gavin Newsom had done a conversation with someone reasonable and said, "Hey, this issue is pretty thorny. Why don't we talk about this and figure out, the particulars so that we can all get on the same page and come up with a reasonable approach to ensure that there is fairness in sports, that we are certainly growing women's athletics and girls' athletics, that we are protecting the inspiring trajectory of women's sports over the past decade, especially." That would make sense to me. But that's not what he did. He invited Charlie Kirk on the first episode of his new podcast. And Charlie Kirk is this extremist bigot. I mean, there are conservatives, and I'm friends with some conservatives who have a lot of questions on trans issues and sometimes disagree with me, and we disagree in good faith and respectfully with each other. Charlie Kirk is not that. Charlie Kirk literally wants to eradicate the trans community. He doesn't want us to exist. He openly says that trans people should not exist, that we should be oppressed, and that we are pretty much antithetical to ideal American society. This would be like going on a podcast with David Duke to talk about Black Lives Matter. That's pretty much the analogy that we're looking at
Great
here.
analogy. Yeah.
Yes. And what really bothers me here is that it is so abundantly clear that he is doing this out of political ambition. That's all this is. That's all this is. And now, look, I know that some of you who are watching this conversation with me and Julie are like, well, maybe there should be restrictions in, sports when it comes to trans athletes. And I completely agree with that. I think that if there are, if a young woman comes out as trans on Sunday, she should not necessarily be able to compete on specific sports teams the following Monday. That's not how it should work. There should be a common sense, rigorous process to ensure fairness. However, we have already had that in place. Back in 2011, the NCAA, in consultation with hundreds of doctors, sports scientists, general experts on this area, came up with a common sense policy to allow trans women to compete in college athletics. And it basically boiled down to this: trans women had to go undergo a year of hormone therapy. They had to establish that they were credibly living as a woman, etc. It all made sense. And because of that, because of hormone therapy, the advantages that someone who goes through male puberty may have gained are significantly, if not outright, diminished. And because of that, over 10 years, from 2011 to 2021, there were something like, I want to say, 600,000 young women awarded college athletic scholarships in the United States. Do you want to take a guess on how many of those 600,000 women were trans?
Zero.
Zero. Not a single trans woman has been awarded a college athletic scholarship at the NCAA in any NCAA sanctioned program in history. It hasn't happened. Out of the thousands of NCAA titles that have been contended, three young trans women have won an NCAA title. One of them at the Division I level with Leah Thomas, who was a swimmer, and two others at the Division II level in track and field. Now with Leah Thomas, the thing that, and I know I'm sorry I'm rambling, but I'm trying to
No,
properly
no, this is
contextualize
I
this.
want people, this is such a good educational tool for me, and also I hope for people who are watching, because I think it's important for people to understand this issue. It's a deeply, not just contentious issue, but it's a deeply complicated issue and a complex issue. So please, I think this is great. Keep going.
It is. And, I
Mm.
think there are a lot of great Democrats out there who are honestly uneasy over this and really want some good clarification. And the thing with Leah Thomas is that at the same meet where she won her national title, she competed in three other events. She didn't even get, she didn't even place in the other events. She got beat pretty soundly by the other women. The other thing too is that there was something like, I want to say 14 or 15 NCAA records broken at that year's championships. Leah Thomas didn't break any records. She didn't even record among the fastest times in that event. This is all a giant red herring. It is a distraction. It is meant to keep people away from focusing on working class issues like making sure that you can pay for childcare, making sure you can pay for health care, raising the minimum wage. The things that working class families in the Democratic Party should be focused on are instead being led astray by a Republican Party who is all too eager to give people a scapegoat and say, you know what, the reason that you're feeling uneasy right now is because of these folks, is because of trans people. And Gavin Newsom has cynically bought into that narrative. And it's so, so tragic because, this is a man who has a long history of LGBTQ support. He famously married same sex couples in 2004 when he was mayor of San Francisco.
That's how he put himself on the map. The first time America heard about Gavin Newsom outside San Francisco was when he did something that nobody else had the courage to do, which is he performed same-sex marriages well before when most mainstream Democrats were talking about same-sex marriage as something they considered to be acceptable. 100%.
That's right. That's right. And he knows what's right on this issue. He does. I guarantee you, he knows the actual particulars of trans youth in sports. He knows that out of the 500,000 NCAA athletes, fewer than 10 are trans. Fewer than 10 out of 500,000. This is not an issue. This is seeking a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. That's basically what this is. And so, my heart was broken this morning because I have admired Gavin Newsom for a long time, and it's clear that he is choosing the easier wrong over the harder right, and that's really sad.
I'm reminded of when I've been I've been involved in politics for so long that I go back to, the 90s. But I remember in 2004, George Bush ran a very cynical reelection campaign that focused on gay marriage and marriage equality. And effectively, in places like Ohio, and in fact, people think he won Ohio by running this very cynical anti-marriage equality campaign. And you know, what's fascinating is how quickly that shifted.
Mm,
Very quickly. I mean, it was incredibly controversial until it wasn't. And then less than, I think, what is it, about a decade later, marriage equality became the law of the land. And now nobody, I mean, yes, there are bigots like Charlie Kirk and others, I'm sure, who don't approve of it, but by and large, America has come to accept marriage equality as something that's fine. Nobody really has an issue with it. I shouldn't say nobody, but for the most part, it's
yeah.
mainstreamed. That took almost no time, and I just remember having conversations with Democratic politicians. I remember being in, I think it was in New Jersey, in 20, I don't remember when, I think it was 2009. Yes, it was in
Mm,
2009. New Jersey voted on legislation to make marriage equality legal, and it was a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor, and they voted it down. They voted it down. And the same politicians, Democratic politicians who voted it down, then 3 or 4 years later, hat in hand, went to not just the gay community, not just the LGBTQ community, but to people like me and to other advocates who were really pushing for it, who were not ourselves members of the LGBTQ community, but understood it as something that was a morally right thing to do, and said, oh my God. We really messed up. We're so sorry," because times have changed by then, right? Because
Yeah.
not because they really had the guts to do the right thing when it was difficult, but because now it had become acceptable. So they had to kind of make up for it. And I feel like that's what's going to happen to Gavin Newsom. But listen, who knows what's going to happen in the next few years? If we have an election in
Mm,
2028, I hope we do. Who
yeah.
knows where we're going to be on this issue? But this is, this is one of those things like everything else that's going to move towards a progression that's going to make Gavin Newsom deeply embarrassed and
Hmm.
apologizing for what he did today. And I just want to, I'm not even sure if you're aware of this, Charlotte, but I did a whole newsletter on this for people who read my newsletter. You might be familiar with this, but for
Everyone should,
others,
by the way.
thank you. But for others who don't, yes, thank you. But for others who haven't, let me just put the context in which Gavin Newsom did this whole thing with Charlie Kirk. And again, I want to stress there are well-meaning people out there who are uneasy
Yeah,
about trans women playing in women's sports. It is I don't want to say that those are concerns that should not be discussed respectfully.
absolutely.
My problem is how it was discussed and the venue with whom it was discussed. But
Hmm.
this is being done at a time when the state of Texas, Charlotte, I don't know if you're familiar with this, the state of Texas, their crazy attorney general who has myriad other problems in addition to the fact that he's under indictment and almost he got impeached, almost got convicted by a Republican
Oh
Senate,
yeah.
and a real problem.
In Paxton.
Because yeah, because Ken Paxton can't leave well enough alone, is suing the NCAA, which since late last year does not allow trans women to compete. They can still practice with the team, but they can no longer compete
That's right.
in sports. That's not good enough for him. He wants people, women specifically, to take a test to prove that they are biological women. And let me tell you what these tests entail, because apparently having a blood test with an X, XX chromosome is not that clear cut. There are plenty of women who have an or it's not as clear cut as you would think.
It's
Men,
not at all.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not at all, right? So the way to do this, and this is not coming from me, the 19th did an article on this, and the
Hmm.
BBC did an article on this. You have to they measure your breast size
Hmm.
and the size of your clitoris. So,
Yes.
so I just want people to understand. I have a 12-year-old boy, but if I had a 12-year-old girl and she was on the track to compete for some sort of college scholarship. Let's say she was playing soccer and she wanted to compete for a college scholarship. And I knew that the way that she would be able to compete in the NCAA would be to eventually have to have some weirdo bureaucrat doctor measure her breasts and measure her clitoris to make sure that she is a biological woman. You know what I would say? I think maybe do something else. Maybe take up the violin. Maybe don't play sports. This is first of all a backdoor way to get rid of Title IX to get women out of
That's right.
sports, period. But understand like this is like Gilead shit. This is getting to a point where you're exploiting, as Charlotte said, fewer than 10 trans athletes in the NCAA. That's according to Charlie Baker, the head of the NCAA, a former Republican governor of Massachusetts, I might add. This is not some wide eyed liberal.
Right.
And despite the fact that there are fewer than 10 trans women in college sport, I think it's actually trans people. I'm not even sure it's
Trans
trans
people
women.
generally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
trans people. They are using the trans community for such to me nefarious means. And people like Charlie Kirk support this.
Yeah.
And that's who Gavin Newsom sat down with today.
Yeah. And, Charlie Kirk isn't just about trans people in sports. He wants to eliminate gender affirming care for trans people. He wants employers to be able to fire trans
Yeah.
people. He wants landlords and owners of housing to be able to deny housing to trans people. He wants trans people completely eliminated from society, and that is not hyperbole. He does not want us to exist. He has said this openly. That is where he comes from. And when I look at this very gross approach to basically genital inspections for
Mhm.
girls and women, this harkens back to the early 20th century when women were first getting into international athletics on a competitive level. The International Olympic Committee used to do the same kind of tests with women. They would measure their breast size, they would measure their
Yeah.
figure, they would ensure that women looked like women in order to compete. So there is a long history of ensuring that women look a certain way, which is a very white European centric presentation, in order for them to qualify as women and compete. There's also a long history of famous women athletes being, and I'm sure you've heard this term before, being trans investigated. So that means that you take a woman who is assigned female at birth, a non trans woman, and you call into question her gender identity and accuse her of being transgender because she doesn't look the part. She doesn't look
Oh, sure.
trans enough.
The entire and by the way, the entire WNBA, Serena Williams, I mean, name it, anybody who's a tall, athletic, muscular woman clearly would not fit the role. And by the way, to me, who decides who gets tested, right? Who decides
Yeah,
like uh, what you said about what you said this whole nonsense about women not being, trans women not being able to use the ladies' room and all this other like I am positive that at some point in my life I have shared a ladies' room with a trans woman. And guess what?
no issues.
Not only do I not know if I did or I didn't, but even if I knew it, Charlotte, if you were in the stall next to me, why would I care?
Yeah,
Why does it matter? Like that's the part to me that makes no sense. Like you're denying housing to trans people. Why? What is a trans neighbor living next door to you going to do to you?
that's right.
That I'm not going to do to you. What is the
Yeah,
difference? And that
I
nobody ever
think,
asks them that question. Like nobody ever says to them, "Hey, calm down on this whole trans thing and just ask, what is it about your life that is bothered by a trans person living next door to you?"
Mhm,
Because to me, it harkens back to I don't want any back in the redlining days. I don't want any black people living next door to me. I don't
mhm.
want any Jewish people living next door to me. Why?
Yeah, yeah, and I think, I think that there are some people in the Republican Party who just purely view this through a cynical lens. They see political
No
opportunism.
question.
It's a great wedge issue for them. But I also think that there are millions of Americans who are genuinely uncomfortable with trans people. It's not about safety or fairness or about their children. It's not about that. Because when you talk to these folks, specifically these folks, not everyone, but specifically these folks, when you talk to them in good faith and try to outline or debunk all the myths out there about trans people, eventually you both reach the conclusion that it's very clear they're just uncomfortable being around trans people. And the reason being, and this is my personal theory, some trans people don't agree with me on this, and that's fine. But I think we live in very uncertain times. And when things are uncertain, we tend to cling to things that are very certain. Now, where I come from when I was growing up, there were things that were very certain, and gender was one of them. I grew up being taught that women are women and men are men, and there are gender roles for women and gender roles for men. And so I understand that perspective. I get having that conditioning. And I think that some people have clung to this so deeply that the world is changing so fast that they look at trans people and it really makes them uncomfortable to see yet another thing that to them was certain. And now they come to find out that not only is it, it's certainly sociologically uncertain, but it's also scientifically uncertain. Trans people have existed all over the world throughout all of recorded human history. Every country, every culture, every race, every ethnicity, every religion, every continent, all around the world for thousands of years. You can go back to ancient Greece. You can go to Native American tribes here in the United States. Trans people and non-binary people have existed forever. For as long as there's been humans, we've existed, but we have not been visible. And we are emerging from this era in which we saw a very quick acceleration of particularly gay rights, same sex marriage, gay adoption, etc. And I think it has been so quick and the world seems so chaotic and uncertain that there are a lot of people in this country who are just saying like enough. I can't do it anymore. I can't learn this quickly about all these changing norms, about things that used to be normal and typical for me. And so I'm somewhat sympathetic to that, somewhat. But what I don't appreciate is that when you try to meet folks like this in good faith, when you try to meet them where they are and explain, look, it doesn't mean that your kid, there is nothing I can do to make your kid trans. I promise you that. There is no book I can read to them. There is no movie I can show them that is going to make them trans,
Right.
because trans people don't choose to be trans. We just don't. The only choice we make is whether or not to come out as trans. And thank God we are moving toward a society in which young people are no longer killing themselves because they're holding this deep down secret over their gender dysphoria and decide, you know what, if I can't be myself and if I have to go through this psychological torture, I might as well kill myself. I would rather adults be uncomfortable with having gender identity challenged than any young person taking their own life because they feel it's not worth living.
Question. No question. And, I remember being in high school in the 80s and in the very early 90s. And there were kids who, in retrospect, were clearly struggling because they were gay. This is before we even get to the whole trans issue, right?
Oh, yeah. How old are you, by
And
the way, if you don't mind me asking, or what year did you graduate high school?
91.
91. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
we're not too far away. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, uh, in a retrospect, some of those people now are living their, kind of follow them on Facebook, living literally their best lives. But I think
Mm,
about how if somebody was just cruel to them one extra time, that they would probably not be living their best lives right now because it was just not in suburban New Jersey where I grew up. It's not that I grew up in, I went to school in Princeton, so it's not like a conservative town. It was obviously a college town, um, but yet, like there's one, I remember this one boy who everybody's like, oh, he's a little effeminate, but it never occurred to anybody that he could be gay because that was just not
mm.
on anybody's radar back then, which is ironic. I mean, crazy now that I think about it. It's not like
Oh yeah.
1950, this was the 80s, but still. And yet, like, you know, people kind of, the guys kind of bullied him for being effeminate and being whatever. And I have no idea. I wasn't really particularly close to him, but I just think about what must have been going on in his head when he came home every night. I think about him so often, because he probably doesn't even remember who I am. And I think about him so often because I keep thinking about what this does to kids far and apart from the typical bullying that kids have to go through in school, which
Mm.
everybody, I don't care how popular you were in high school, everybody had some sort of bad thing happen to them.
Right.
But, but to then have to live with your identity being challenged and not being able to talk to anybody about it. And that's just somebody whose sexual orientation is not what everybody else's, or he thought everybody else's was. Now,
Mhm.
layer on top of that, that you're effectively trapped in a body that you can't relate to because, I mean, you tell me, you grew up in a Christian conservative house, right? In Texas.
Well, it's interesting.
So,
I grew up in conservative Central Texas,
right,
but my father was certainly not LGBTQ friendly. That's for
right.
sure. My thing was, and by the way, not all trans people are the same. Some trans people will discover late in life that, oh, that's why I've been so miserable all this time is because I have gender dysphoria and I'm actually trans. And then they go talk to a therapist and, go on the path of transition. Some of us, it starts early though. Like I remember being 3 or 4 and knowing that I wanted to be a girl and not understanding why and being very scared of that. And so, my approach growing up was, you know what, this is just something wrong with me, and I'm just going to be as good a kid, as good a kid, as good a kid as I can be. And so maybe God will cleanse this from me. Maybe if I pray enough, God will take this away. And so, I spent every day praying through high school, and I got really good grades, and I played football, and I was student body president, and I was really good at two shoes because I thought, you know what, if I'm not doing enough to be a good kid, so that's why God has not taken away this feeling inside me of wanting to be a girl. So I didn't even know the word transgender until I was in high school, by the way. And it scared me. It scared me so deeply the first time I saw it that I just immediately just avoided it. Just put it in a lockbox in the back of my mind and tried to forget about it. I graduated high school and joined the military. And I joined the military because I wanted to serve my country. I felt it was the right thing to do. But there was a part of me that wondered, if I go to basic training and if I serve, however many years in the military, maybe that will be the thing that finally cements my masculinity and wanting to be a woman will be cleansed from my soul. by going through that trial by fire in the military. And it wasn't 18 months into my enlistment that I just had to admit to myself, this is never going away. I've done all this stuff. I enlisted in the infantry and I am running around all the time with guns and doing everything I'm supposed to be doing as a young man in the United States. And this feeling isn't going away. And so it'd be several more years before I finally came out and talked to a therapist and whatnot. But my point is that there are so many people in this country who are in the closet, who are transgender, who are struggling, trying to figure out how to um, they don't even want to be trans. They just want to get rid of it. They want to like extract it from their soul and get rid of it. And there's no solution to it because they live in areas or communities or societies in which it is stigmatized and told it is a choice and told that something they must be doing wrong in order for them to be trans. And it just really breaks my heart. I did everything right. And it took me a long time to recognize that being trans was a gift from God, that I am made in God's image, that I am born as a trans person, perfectly made in God's image, that this is a blessing from God. And it really breaks my heart to see the way that people are so scared right now. Tens of millions of Americans are scared because of the economy or foreign policy or what have you. And they've decided that the one measure of control they've decided they can have is over whether or not trans people should exist. And that is not the America that I love. And it's not the America that I think it represents the best of us.
Yeah, I feel like in times of adversity, I never will forget. I read this. This is kind of going down a rabbit hole, but it's relevant to what you just said. I read a biography of F. Scott Fitzgerald um, many, many, many years ago, and F. Scott Fitzgerald was from Minneapolis, and then went to school at Princeton at a time when Princeton was an incredibly waspy. He was Catholic, I should say. F. Scott Fitzgerald, very, very waspy, very, very patrician, probably the most conservative, probably still is the most conservative of the Ivy Leagues, but certainly very conservative at the time. And has eating clubs. It's a very kind of waspy, clubby. As somebody who grew up there, I can tell you kind of a waspy, and I'm not either waspy nor clubby, nor did I go to Princeton University, but I know the town very well.
I'm lost. I'm a loss,
Uh,
but
I'm just a Jewish girl from New Jersey, but
yeah.
he went to school there and was really bullied for being Catholic and being from the Midwest, and he wasn't like everybody else who was, kind of this Northeast Brahmin guy.
Mm,
And so what did F. Scott Fitzgerald do? He found the one or two or three Jewish kids at Princeton and really beat down on them, right? Like
yeah.
he felt so bad about how he was being treated as a Midwestern Catholic that he had to find somebody even more discriminated community to beat down on. And so he decided that he was going to bully the Jews who were at
Yeah.
Princeton. And to me, that says it all about where we are as a country right now. Because you're absolutely right. People are terrified. Um, People are watching the transformation of our economy. And I'm not talking about the ups and downs of inflation or anything else. I'm talking about the real transformation from a manufacturing base over the last 40 years, 50 years to now. AI is going to be taking a lot more jobs. People are terrified of all of those
Yeah.
changes. Um, uh, Frankly, if you've been a white man in this country, and I hate being critical. I'm married to a white man. I am the mother of a white man, so I don't mean at all critical of white men,
No,
but they
absolutely not.
but they have had it pretty good for the last 400 years in this country. And
Yeah.
suddenly they see women over the last couple of generations not just doing equally well, but now having higher levels of college graduation and so on. And constantly hearing that um, nobody's pitying they don't like that nobody's pitying the white man, that everybody's kind of emphasizing, as they call, DEI for women, or DEI for um people of color, or DEI for the LGBTQ community. And so they're starting to
Mm,
feel like nobody's paying attention to them. So what do you do? Let us find the most vulnerable group, because it's not acceptable publicly to be awful to women anymore, although of course it's becoming more and more acceptable, but it's not
sure.
it's not as acceptable to discriminate against women. It is not acceptable to discriminate against people of color. It is not acceptable to really discriminate against gay and lesbian men and women anymore. But let's find that one group that it's still completely acceptable to discriminate against vocally
Hmm.
and publicly, and that'll make us feel better about our own lot in life. And I go back to what I said to you before. What person on earth who is trans has ever bothered you? What is it about you, Charlotte Clymer, or any person who is trans that affects the life of these people who hate the trans community? What, first of all, have you ever met one? And second, if you have, what has that person done to you that has adversely impacted your life? Because if they've done something to you that's adversely impacted your life, they've probably done it not in their trans capacity, but in their capacity of being a jerk, right?
That's right.
And so that could be me, that could be anybody, not because
Hmm.
somebody's trans, but because somebody's an asshole. If somebody
That's
was bad
right.
to you, if somebody was bad to you. So nobody can answer that question for me. Like, I truly, I would like to speak to Charlie Kirk for one moment, just to pose that question to him. That's actually what Gavin Newsom should have done. Ask that question and then ended the conversation. If he had to have a conversation with Charlie Kirk, because I don't mind. Listen, I spent 10 years as the in-house Democrat at Fox News. I certainly don't mind engaging people with whom I disagree. I am totally fine with it. In fact, I think it's from a
Yeah,
communications perspective, it's necessary because you're not going to change hearts and minds if you ignore people like that. But
totally
you
agree.
have to ask that question, right? Just ask the question, why? What is it about? And I bet you he couldn't answer. I
No,
bet you he
no.
wouldn't.
Not in a good faith way. No.
Right, right.
No, if he had to speak truthfully, I think that someone like Charlie Kirk, specifically Charlie Kirk, I think that for him, it's far more about the grifting,
Oh, it's the
right?
money.
Like
Yeah, yeah,
weaponizing people's
yeah.
discomfort in order to make money and grow his profile within this movement. I think there is a spectrum of discomfort with people who are uncomfortable with trans folks, and there are various reasons. One of them, I think, is that straight men are afraid of being attracted to trans women because it might mean something about them. There
like
are
like
a lot
like
of,
like like the crying game, right? That was like the
yeah,
best, yeah, best
no,
example of that. Right.
that's right. That's right. And I tell you what, there are a lot of trans women who are not openly trans, meaning that they present as women, they are perceived as women, but a lot of, most folks who meet them don't know that they're trans. And they are put in danger when, even at a bar, if a man finds them attractive and then, somehow discovers they're trans, he gets really defensive and
Oh yeah.
angry and irate and then attacks them. And there are a lot of trans women who have been killed this way, not because they did anything wrong, not because they were bothering anybody, but because they simply existed.
Yeah.
And they had to be the final point of accountability for a man who was so uncomfortable being attracted to a trans woman. And what that must mean about him, to me, it doesn't mean anything, but what that must mean about him so that he would kill her. I think for some women, they have been told or conditioned to believe that trans women are somehow mocking them, that trans men are mocking femininity, or that that I believe as a trans woman that I am the exact same as a non-trans woman, and I don't believe that. I don't have a uterus. I cannot get pregnant. I certainly don't menstruate. I don't understand specific struggles that non-trans women have gone through. We have two very different.
Count your blessings in the last one, but keep going.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no kidding. Yeah, and by the way,
Right.
I have no desire to get pregnant or menstruate for that matter.
Right.
But there are a lot of women who I think have been told that trans women are co-opting their identity and don't understand everything that women go through. And meanwhile, trans women are more likely to be discriminated against, more likely to be sexually harassed, more likely to be killed, more likely to be raped. There are so many statistics in which trans women are quite literally intentionally targeted for being a trans woman. And I'm not saying that this isn't complicated or that there aren't women in this country who are coming from an understandable perspective. One I might disagree with, but it's understandable given the environment in which they grew up or given the community in which they live. Fine. Let's have a discussion. Let's meet, in some common ground and compare perspectives. Because the truth is that big question that Republicans love to ask, what is a woman? It can't be answered. that's the great conceit of that question, is that it can't be answered. There is no definition. There is no clear definition of a woman that does not exclude other women. So, for example, let's take every person, every woman who is assigned female at birth, and if you ask Republicans, like, okay, what do you think is a woman? They'll be like, well, she's an adult human female. Okay, but what is an adult human female? What makes someone an adult human female? They'll be like, well, she's born with a uterus. And then you point out, well, actually, there is a percentage of women who are assigned female at birth who are born without a uterus, or who don't menstruate for whatever reason. So, does having a
Yeah.
uterus, or menstruating, or the capacity to get pregnant make someone a woman? And they're like, well, that's not what it means. It means that, this is a person with excess chromosomes. And then you point out, well, actually, there are far more than just X, Y, and XX. There are six common, they're called karyotypes. That's what XX and XY are. They're a karyotype. And there are six common ones. Now, that's fine, but this is going to blow your mind even more. And I know you know this, but a lot of the wonderful folks watching this don't know this. There are a lot of folks who are assigned female at birth who have XY chromosomes, who women who are assigned female at birth who have XY chromosomes, and men who are assigned male at birth who have XX chromosomes. This is an actual biological dynamic. So then you come back with that, and Republicans will say, well, that's not what I mean. I mean, she just needs to look like a woman. Well, what does a woman look like? And then when you really drill down into it, what they mean is a white, European centric
Yep.
woman. And ideally, for a lot of them, it's a blonde, blue haired, 5'4" woman who has an hourglass figure. It is the male gaze at work. That's all it's about. When it comes down to it, Republicans are wanting women to subscribe to the male gaze and how they prefer an ideal woman should look. There is no rational answer to this question. For me, if someone identifies as a woman, they're a woman, period. That doesn't mean they get special treatment. That doesn't mean they should not be held to the same standard of conduct and ethics. That does not mean they should not recognize their privilege, as I recognize my privilege in not having a uterus. I'm an ally to women who can be raped and impregnated and need abortion access. But it doesn't mean that there is a clearly defined scientific answer to what is a woman, because there's not.
And what I love about this is you mentioned that they would say, well, it's a woman who's got, the XX chromosome. And I will tell you, I have no idea what kind of chromosomes I have. I've never been
Nor
tested
do
for
I.
it, right? I've never been tested for it. And I bet you neither has anybody who asks that question.
No.
I bet you Charlie Kirk, to use him as one example, has no idea what kind of he just assumes he's got XY chromosomes. Like I assume that I've got XX chromosomes, but I might not, because you pointed out very astutely that there are six different spectra of this. And the reality is that we don't know. I mean, we know he got
Mhm.
tested, but this goes back to this crazy Ken Paxton thing, which is because of what you said. They acknowledge actually the other side, that what you said is accurate, so it's not enough to test for those chromosomes. You've also got to test breast size. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, I have plenty of friends who have who are I've always known them to be women. I grew up with them and they're flat chested. Not
Yeah.
everybody's got boobs, right? And I've
Yeah.
never checked out another woman's clitoris because I haven't. But I have
Yeah.
no idea what the appropriate size is for it. I actually don't know what the appropriate size is for it, but I'm very
But we all know
disturbed.
that vagina is very
Yeah, but
wildly different in,
yeah, but
yeah,
I'm very curious as to who decides what that appropriate size is, and that's how you get to play at the NCAA level. I mean,
yeah,
when I tell people this, I just remember we talked about it on for people who joined us on Saturday on our coffee and conversation show on Saturday, and people, like, I had to actually put these articles in the chat because their minds were blown. They're just like, this can't be. And I just want people to understand this is where they're going, because
yeah,
it's not about the trans community. That's just a convenient scapegoat to divide. It's about going after all women too.
yeah.
And the trans community is just the tip of the spear.
Hmm.
That's what they do. And I did not want to spend all this time talking about Gavin Newsom, going, with
Well,
Charlie
and
Kirk, because neither of them actually deserve to have, after today, deserve to have that kind of time devoted to them. I'm just deeply disappointed. I'll tell you this. I don't know Gavin Newsom well. I've met him a few times. He used to be
I know his
married to
wife.
yeah, his wife is, I think, fantastic.
She's
Um,
fantastic, but she has not spoken out about this, and
yeah,
I considered her a friend not too long ago, and it's pretty
yeah,
sad that she's been
um,
silent.
yeah. I don't know how much Jen speaks out about. Does she speak out about other stuff he does? I feel like they kind of have their own thing going
I
on.
mean, she's been pretty clear on her support for trans rights in the past. In fact, she was the first um, spouse of a governor to go by first partner,
I
not
know, I
first
know,
wife.
I know. Jen is great.
Yeah,
Uh,
she's great, but she hasn't spoken out today, and it's really
yeah.
tragic. I do
Um,
want to say something to your viewers, though, real quick,
yes.
because I do feel like, look, polling shows that more than 60% of Americans don't believe they personally know a trans person, meaning that they don't know anyone in their life who they understand is transgender. And because of that, there's a lot of confusion. I think a lot of your viewers might find these issues intimidating. They might be a little scared or uneasy over them. And that's normal. That's understandable. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's perfectly fine to be uncomfortable with concepts that are new or are outside of your experience. But I would encourage people to understand that there are so many trans people who would love to chat with you, who would love to compare perspectives, who I guarantee you'll find a lot more in common with than you'll ever find with an anti-trans bigot. And moreover, discomfort is a gift. It's a gift. Discomfort means that there is learning we have to do. I'm not a perfect person. I make mistakes all the time. I'm a white woman who is not a religious minority, who has all sorts of privileges. If it comes to issues of white supremacy and the horrible oppression that people of color face in this country, if it comes to anti-Semitism and the ongoing anti-Jewish attitudes that occur in this country that go unaccountable, whether it's women who need abortion access, there are so many experiences that I don't know, and I do make mistakes. And when that happens, I realize that I have some learning to do. And what I so appreciate are those people who have taken me under their wing and said, "Hey, look, you're a good person, but you need to learn more about this." And I've been so thankful for those people who gracefully invited me in and wanted to give me a little perspective on things I didn't know about. And so if you're watching this and you don't know anything about trans issues and you're scared of them or you're intimidated by them, don't be. We want you in this conversation. We want you to come into the fold. We want to get rid of the fear. We want to get rid of this so we can focus on issues that should actually matter, like childcare, like healthcare, like making sure that working class families have what they need in this country. That to me is the end goal, making sure that everyone is lifted up and that no one is in this country has to struggle with housing or homelessness or food insecurity or not making enough to make sure that their kid grows up in a healthy and safe environment. That to me is the end goal. All this stuff is unnecessary, it is counterproductive, and it distracts us from what we really should be working toward, which is that no one gets left behind.
Well, let me ask you about that. Thank you for saying that, because I think it's an incredibly important message for people to hear. That it's true that I think most people don't know anybody who's trans, man or woman, and just because you don't know it doesn't, first of all, doesn't mean you actually don't know anybody. You might just not know anybody who has publicly transitioned, but I
That's right.
guarantee you probably know somebody who's struggling. Um, but you raise an excellent question that I'm actually struggling with myself, which is that I think the Democratic Party is quite lost in how we're
Yeah.
communicating these days. And I feel like Republicans, and especially Trump, are very good at these little shiny objects, including talking about trans mice research at the State of the
Oh,
Union, whatever that was
geez.
the other
Good
day, right?
Lord.
So, like, and everybody kind of jumps on that little shiny object. And on the one hand, you're absolutely right. We should be talking about healthcare. We should be talking about childcare. We should be talking about the fact that the price of eggs is going up. The fact that Donald Trump on August 15th said that he was going to lower grocery prices on day one, and by every metric, they're up. Your 401ks are evaporating with every breath he takes on tariffs, up, down, up, down. I mean, there's so many issues to talk about, and yet, do you let this kind of bigotry go unanswered? I mean, do you just say, look, we're not going to focus? on you beating up on trans people or you beating up on whoever else you want to beat up on because we want to focus on better polling issues? Or do you like, I
Mm.
don't know, what do you think about that? Because I struggle with the fact that if you want to be an ally to an oppressed group of people, you got to stand up and call it out. I feel like in 1933, not enough Germans called out the hatred towards the Jews because they were focused on other issues. And so what ended up happening,
Mhm.
right? And so I feel like if you don't call it out, it just becomes normalized as it has, as you mentioned, with Gavin Newsom and others who are now starting to normalize this kind of rhetoric. So what do you do? What do you make of this?
That's a damn good question. And I think there's a key point that a lot of folks are understandably missing in all this in terms of the long-term strategy of the Democratic Party. First of all, I'll say this, and this is probably going to sound a little controversial, but it goes to my larger point. If I thought last year that the Democratic Party saying, look, we're going to focus exclusively on economy, we're not going to do anything about trans rights right now, and if I thought that that would have been the solution to overwhelmingly defeating Donald Trump and getting overwhelming majorities in Congress, I would have been okay with that. I would have been fine. I'd been like, you know what? Let's defeat the fascists. Let's take over Congress. Let's make sure that we put some guardrails in place. Then we'll focus on, rights for the trans community. Okay, if that was the reasonable common sense approach, fine. But it's not. It's really not. And I'll tell you why it's not. And it's very simple. I promise it's so easy to understand. Democratic leadership thinks right now, they really do believe this, that once the issue over trans passports and trans people in the military and gender affirming care and trans employment for that matter, once those issues are settled, once the courts have had their say and Donald Trump's executive orders are implemented, that the Republican Party will simply move on and that Democrats will be able to meet them on our strong issues, which tends to be the economy, which tends to be working class families, right? That is what Leader Schumer is thinking right now. That's what Leader Jeffries is thinking right now. They believe that by ignoring trans issues and focusing on broad economic issues, that this is all going to go away, and we will win on the issues that should matter the most. That is a fatal error. Fatal error. Here's what's gonna happen on this trajectory over the next 18 months, and it's very clear to me. Right now, the Republicans see an open goal, and there's no goalie in sight, and they are able to score at will. They are able to keep kicking at this goal, and rack up political points because they know that Democrats are, I would say, at best hesitant and at worst completely unwilling to engage on trans issues publicly. And because of that, there is a vacuum of information and a vacuum of leadership that the GOP is all too happy to fill and to push propaganda and to keep hammering this drumbeat about trans people being a threat to society. Once this first tier of issues is, gone and settled or whatever, trans passports and gender affirming care for youth and trans kids in sports, they're going to move on to the next tier. They're going to talk about, well, you know what? Actually, we're going to overturn the Bostock ruling from the Supreme Court and allow employers to fire trans people. We're going to ensure that, in some states, there's going to be efforts to make being trans a sexual felony. Like you are a sexual offender if you present as transgender in public. They're going to move on to more extreme issues and they're going to dare Democrats to fight back. And if Democrats don't say anything, if they allow this a vacuum of information to go uncontested, we're going to get to late October 2026, just before the election. We're going to be in the same situation where propaganda is going wild, unaccountable, where most Americans are getting filled with nonsense information that trans people are coming after your kids. Trans people should be deported. Trans people should be incarcerated for presenting as trans in public, and we're going to get beat again in the midterms. So for me, as a trans person, yes, I would love to. I would love for Democrats just to fight for the sake of the survival of my community. That would be great. But everyone watching this has a stake because as long as we are unwilling as long as our Democratic leadership is unwilling to fight publicly on these issues, the more we are going to suffer at the ballot box because Republicans are not going to let this go. They're not. This is never going away. Trans issues are not going away. If Republicans feel that they can get a significant electoral advantage in pushing the most heinous, destructive propaganda against trans people, and scare the hell out of voters, they're going to keep doing it. They'll just make things up. Doesn't matter what it is. They've already tried to make things up. They've already tried to blame school shootings on trans people when trans people weren't involved. They've lied about trans people preying on kids. They're going to keep doing this. So, my message to Democratic lawmakers right now is understand that if you keep letting this go unchallenged, it's going to hurt all of us. We're going to lose even more seats in the House and Senate, and we'll get our asses kicked in 2028. So we all have a stake in fighting transphobia right now. We all have a measure of survival involved in fighting back against this heinous propaganda.
What do you think more broadly? Because I so admire the way that you communicate. You, just for people who don't know or don't follow Charlotte on social media, which you should. And I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to her, but because you really should. The reason I'm talking to Charlotte is because I'm such an admirer of how she communicates in social media and generally, not just on social media. But
Mm.
as somebody who is such a good communicator, what do you make? What I guess the question, the $64,000 question is, what are Democrats not doing right? I'm not talking about the grassroots because I feel like the
Hmm.
grassroots actually has kind of figured it out. I'm talking about the people with the megaphone, um, who we elected to be the leaders of the Democratic Party, right? I guess not just Chuck Schumer, not just Hakeem Jeffries, but really, um, the core leadership of the party, like the people who showed up to the State of the Union the other day. Should they have shown up? If they did show up, should they
Mm.
have done what they did? I have my own thoughts on this, which I'm happy to discuss. But what message should we be conveying in a unified manner that we're not conveying right now? Or maybe we are. I don't know. Whatever you think.
So it's a messaging problem. That's what's
Right.
central here, right? And it's not even necessarily, well, it is what Democrats should be saying. Don't get me wrong, because Democrats should be saying a lot. Democratic leadership specifically should be saying a lot, but we'll put that aside for a second. Right now, it's an infrastructure problem. That's what it is. So, 5 or 10 years ago, the smart messaging strategy was to do cable news hits, to go on the Sunday shows, meet the press, State of the Union on CNN, talk to the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, these big legacy outlets and the cable news programs. And that's how you got a message out. That's how you built your
Right.
brand and you pushed issues that were important. However, with the rapid expansion of alternative media and with the balkanization of how people get their news now, Republicans have built this entire infrastructure outside of traditional media that is highly effective. And they've spent many, many years building it. So if you talk to the average Republican voter, they might watch Fox News or they might see something on Newsmax, or they might read the occasional article in the Washington Examiner or maybe the Daily Mail when the Daily Mail comments on American issues. But most of the information they're getting are from conservative influencers, are from streaming shows, are from sources that are way outside mainstream media. That's how it's happening. And the Republican Party, because they've spent many years building this, has gotten so good at focusing on a central message and then disseminating it to all of the I would say the most influential people in this outside structure. As Democrats, we don't have much of an outside structure right now. And I think that most Democratic lawmakers, bless their hearts, are still focused on the idea that in order to talk to the American people, you have to go and meet the press, and you have to do the cable news hit on MSNBC, and you have to do the op-ed in the New York Times or talk to a political reporter at the Times, right? That for them has always been the bread and butter, and that has put us at an enormous disadvantage. Look, Rachel Maddow on a really good night will get 6 million viewers. That's about 2% of the American public.
I don't know that Rachel
Uh,
Maddow has ever gotten 6 million viewers unless it's the State of the Union, or I mean,
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah,
average,
sorry, yeah,
the average,
on a
yeah,
really
the
good night.
average, like Sean Hannity or the Five, which is the number one show at Fox, they get like 3 to 4 million a night. So,
Right.
but to your point, it's not a lot in the large
No,
scheme
it's
of things.
not.
Yeah.
Not in a country of 330 million
Yeah.
people. It's not. And daytime cable news is even worse. I mean, I'd say maybe a million five when you're having an average day.
Yeah,
There
less. Yeah.
are 28-year-old conservative influencers who can pull way more than that with a really spicy guest talking about a really controversial issue. And so there's this whole asymmetrical thing going on. Now, I do have some good news. I think that there are people in the Democratic Party who understand this as an issue and who are working rapidly to build that infrastructure. So, Lauren Underwood, Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, and the DPCC, which I forget what that stands for, forgive me, but before the joint address to Congress on Tuesday, they invited about I want to say 40 Democratic or progressive influencers to come to the Capitol, interview members of Congress, and get the message out. And this is exactly what we should be doing. I was one of them.
Exactly.
I talked to several
Great.
members of Congress on Tuesday. And, that's what we should be doing. We need to build our infrastructure outside of traditional media. I'm not saying don't go on MSNBC or don't go on Meet the Press, but I got to tell you, where I'm from in Texas, not even the average person, but no one watches Meet the Press. No one gives a damn what this person said in some kind of quip or some kind of gaffe when they're talking to the anchor of Meet the Press. What they care about is what they see on Facebook, or an article from the Daily Wire that their conservative in-law
Yeah.
shares on social media. That's what they care about.
Yeah.
That's what they see day to day the most of all. So Democrats have to lean into alternative media. It's fine to participate in mainstream media, get your cable news hit. I'm not saying don't, but the bulk of our energy right now should be investing in platforms and infrastructures that can reach the American people directly outside of the mainstream.
That's so true because I will just say somebody who spent the last 20 years, if not more, in cable news. I don't know if people realize this. The average age, I shouldn't say the average, the median age of CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News viewer is, I forgot which was which, but it's between those three, 69 to 71.
Yep,
And that's not to say that the median age. That's not to say that that's not an important demographic. It's a very important demographic.
absolutely.
But it's to say that you're leaving a huge swath of people behind. I know when I'm doing CNN or MSNBC, I no longer am a Fox for reasons we can talk about another day. But I know that my audience is older, skews whiter, and skews wealthier. And so, you kind of know who the audience is. And you also,
Yep.
by the way, have about 2 seconds to get your point across before the next commercial break. So you really better be a good speaker and know how to do it in a very soundbite way. It doesn't lend
Hmm.
itself to real discussions any more
That's
than
right.
Twitter or Blue Sky do, right? What
That's right.
lends itself to discussions. I'm so glad Substack exists. I'm so glad that YouTube exists where people can have these kinds of conversations because I think you just did an educate master class on issues that people would never be able to do by virtue of the fact on cable news, by virtue of the fact that there's a commercial break they have to go to 3 minutes after you start speaking. And then you have to give the
Hmm.
other side equal time most of the time, right?
That's right.
So, um, so, but you're absolutely right because somebody who worked on the Hill a very long time ago, the big goal was to get your boss and meet the press. I mean,
Yeah,
that was like the goal.
it was fun.
Yeah, if I were a Hill staffer right now, fine, you're gonna meet the press, fantastic. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Like to me, going on a really popular Substack live with somebody huge, or going on somebody's YouTube show who's got a huge growth, actually brings you into more contact with a more diverse group of people
Hmm.
than any meet the press hit would make. And unfortunately, I think I spoke to a member of Congress who's pretty high up there. He's been around a long time. um, a week ago, and I said to him, "What the hell? Like, what is going on? What are you guys doing?" And he said, he's very honest. He said, "The leadership doesn't know what to do, so they're doing nothing at all."
Yeah.
And I thought that was the most pathetic answer because they've had a while to figure it out, like a
Yeah.
long time to figure it out. Donald Trump got elected on November 5th. we're about to enter the 6 month. I mean, what is that? 4 months, 5 months? Like, it's time
Mhm.
to figure it out.
I was talking
And
to a member of Congress, I think it was a month ago, on the phone, and I asked them, like, listen, off the record, uh, was there anything done between election day and inauguration? Was there any planning put in place? Were there any study groups? Were there any coffee meetings of Democrats getting together and being like, look, we know what's coming. Let's start getting our messaging prepared. And their exact response to me was, if there was, I wasn't told about it. That's it. Democratic leadership in Congress did absolutely nothing between election day and inauguration day.
so
Nothing,
here's
not a damn
so
thing.
so here's what's going to happen because nothing in the world is new. Um, somebody is gonna there's gonna be a situation where somebody is gonna get primaried, somebody really high up, and it's gonna be an Eric Cantor situation. Remember Eric? For people who don't remember, Eric
Oh yeah,
Cantor was I think he was he the House minority? Sorry, he was
he
the
was
either
one of
the
the young guns. Yeah,
but no, but he was either the House Majority Leader or the House Whip. I forgot what he was. I think he was the Majority Leader. He was the number two
yeah, yeah.
guy in the House
That's right.
uh, in 2010. And he got primaried by a random guy who had never been in office before, and he lost. And
Yeah.
that's how you knew the Tea Party had taken over the Republican Party. And in
Hmm.
short order, John Boehner, who's Speaker, retired, and a whole new generation of people came in. Paul Ryan came in, all those people. But I say that because same thing happened here in New York when AOC won, right?
Hmm.
The whip
Yeah,
lost
that's right.
um, to her. And she was a bartender with no political base, but she came in because he wasn't performing. It's going to happen over and over and over again. Because,
Yeah,
and I'm not even suggesting, and I say this as somebody who's worked my whole life in the establishment wing of the Democratic Party.
yeah.
But
Me too, by the way.
yeah, right. And so I don't say this as somebody who's some, like, let's burn the house
I'm not a
down. But
leftist.
I'm
I know
at
you're
the
not a leftist.
but
We're
I'm at the
pretty.
let's burn the house down moment in my life now where at the age of
Yeah.
51, I'm like, you know what? Like Bernie Sanders, who I never support, didn't support him when he ran against Hillary, didn't support him when he
Me
ran
neither.
against Biden. Like,
Nope.
he's right,
He
and
is right.
it turns out he was right all along,
Mm.
and not necessarily that my policies and his align on everything, but from a
Yeah, yeah.
but from a and same with AOC, right? Not that my policies align with hers on many things because they don't. But if she ran against Chuck Schumer right now as a New York voter, and for
He'd
me to
win.
say this, is really, I mean, if you know anything about my history, you know where I come from. I'd vote for
Just to be
AOC.
just to be clear, we are
Yeah,
both establishment Democrats. Neither of us are
100%.
leftists. In
Yeah,
fact, leftists think that we're sellouts. Just to be
absolutely.
clear.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But for us to say this, what the hell does that mean? God, like wake up, Democrats, because for me to say that I would vote for AOC over Chuck Schumer, despite the fact that I actually, from a policy perspective, I'm much more aligned with where Schumer is than where AOC is. For me to say that means that that's how dire the situation has gotten.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
and
bad.
it's bad. Like when I am sitting here screaming into the void, as are you, as is every single Democrat who's not in office right now, screaming into the void, do something. And the answer is, what can we do when they're minority? Well, you know what? Look at Mitch McConnell, because Mitch
Mhm.
McConnell knew exactly what to do when he was in the minority.
Do you remember 2009?
Yep.
Early 2009. So, for those of you who don't know or don't remember how bleak 2009 was for Republicans, it was exceedingly bleak. Democrats walked in with 58 senators. And at several points in 2010, they actually had a filibuster-proof majority. Literally 14, excuse me, 15 years ago, Democrats had a filibuster-proof majority very briefly.
Yep. That's how we
We
passed
had
Obamacare. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how we passed Obamacare. We had a majority of what, 35, 40 seats in the House.
Yeah.
And there were reporters who were openly saying in early 2009 that they thought it might be unhealthy for the country how incredibly popular Barack Obama was as a leader. They thought it might be unhealthy for free speech or good faith conversations or disagreements on policy. Maybe the Democratic Party should not be this popular because it's bad for policy discussions. Which, okay, valid point, whatever. We can discuss that. but things were looking very
That was a
bleak for
long time
Republicans.
ago when people had those kinds of discussions, but go on,
That's
sorry.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, did Republicans and did Republicans back up and say, you know what, maybe we should just meet Democrats where they are? We know that Barack Obama agrees with us on some things. We'll get some policy victories here and there, and then we'll just start rebuilding the party. We'll wait for Democrats to screw up, and we'll start rebuilding the party. No, no, they didn't wait at all. That November in 2008, after they got completely shellacked in the election, they got together and they started organizing and they started doing messaging. They literally sent out memos that December, I believe, and not even January, but that December to every Republican member of the House saying, here's how we are going to be obstructive in the legislative
Yeah.
process. Here's how we are going to attack Democrats. Here's how we are going to just be antithetical to everything that Barack Obama stands for. Doesn't matter if we even agree with what he's saying. We're just going to say no to as many things as possible. And that is what they proceeded to do. And in 2010, we got our clocks cleaned in the House and in the Senate. It was a red wave that year in
Yeah.
2010. So what I'm saying is I am so sick and tired of hearing this very implied reasoning from Democratic leadership that we need to wait for Trump to screw up. That is, can I tell you why that's wrong? Because let's say, Trump is going to screw up. Yeah, that's going to happen. The economy is going to falter significantly. Our foreign policy is abysmal. Fine. We know that there are catastrophes on the horizon approaching us very fast. However, voters still need a vision to come back to. They need something for the Democratic Party to lure them in. We need a vision. We need a plan. We need to say, this is what we stand for. This is what we stand against, which is fascism, attacks on civil liberties, not centering working class families, prioritizing billionaire corruption over childcare, housing, working class wages, all those things. But we're not doing a very good job at giving voters that robust, strong, very confident policy plan and vision. And when Trump does screw up, voters are not going to just come crawling back. I guarantee you that if we stay on this trajectory where we're not presenting a grand, bold vision for the country, voters are not going to say, "Oh, let's go back to the Democrats." They're going to say, "Well, both parties suck. What do
Yeah.
I do now? Maybe I should just not even vote because they're not working for me."
Yeah. It's depressing, and I feel like so many of us are screaming into the void, and I don't know what it's going to take to get them to wake up. I actually decided I was going to start hosting town halls with members of Congress just to ask them these questions. So for people who are paying attention to
Mhm.
that, I am having Congressman Frank Pallone, who is the ranking
Mm.
member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, on doing a Substack Live with me next Monday. And the reason he's so important, just for folks to understand, is Medicaid is in his committee. When they
Yeah,
moved to cut Medicaid, he is the ranking member. He was the former chair of that committee. He's the person who's literally the single one person who's protecting Medicaid of anybody in the House. And so I want to talk to him about that. But I also want to ask him, what are you guys doing? He actually has done a good job. He himself has done a very good job communicating, I think, if you go to his social media, but
mhm,
and just generally the way he's been talking about things. But
yeah,
he's an important member of Congress. But I do want to I think it's important to press these members of Congress, if you have access to them, as I will on Monday, to have them go back to leadership and say, listen, I'm hearing from content creators, I'm hearing from people of influence in the Democratic grassroots, or I'm hearing from just normal people on the street, whether
mhm.
at town halls or just at the coffee shop or at the Starbucks as I'm waiting in line. They want answers, they want action. And
That's right.
nobody wants to hear anymore that you can't do anything because, again, I go back to Mitch McConnell, the single best leader of my lifetime. And it kills me to say that. Mitch
Yeah,
McConnell got a Supreme Court justice when Barack Obama was president. I mean, what, like, how
yeah,
does that work?
it's
Except that
crazy.
he knew how to gum up the works, and they never paid a penalty for it. They shut down
No,
the, you know how many times Republicans, Democrats have never shut down the government? Republicans
never.
have shut down the government I don't remember how many times, but
It's
multiple
like
times.
6 or 7 times.
Yeah,
Yeah,
multiple times. And
yeah,
yet, despite the fact that they shut down the government, Democrats are sitting around and never paid a price for it. Won every time after they did, every time. And the answer is from Democrats, well, we can't shut down the government. We'll get blamed for it. Are you effing kidding me? When were Republicans ever blamed for shutting down the government? They were rewarded. They were rewarded because
every time.
at least they have a vertebrae, right? They have vertebrae. They have something. They have testicular fortitude, for lack of a completely horrible misogynistic, term. But they have the guts to do this,
Mhm.
and Democrats just look like a bunch of push. Like it's so I don't know, Charlie,
Pushovers.
because yeah, because you talk to them. You live down there. And what did they say when you interviewed them? Did they have any insight into this, or what
Well,
did they say?
To be clear, I think that most Democratic members are really doing their best within certain constraints. They are, I think there are a lot of Democratic members who are being vocal on things like immigration and trans rights and abortion, and talking about working class families and attacking, Musk. And it's not about spectrum, by the way. It's not about leftist or centrist or whatever. There are Democrats across the ideological spectrum who are doing good work right now. And I want to be very clear about that. But when I sit down and talk with some of these members of Congress, I just get the feeling that they are being held hostage to this strategy of waiting for Trump to catastrophically mess up. That's what's going on right now. Leader Schumer and Leader Jeffries are waiting for Trump to just catastrophically mess up. That's what it's about. And it's tragic because we cannot wait for that. We we can't wait for that. Moderate voters don't even agree with Republicans on most things. But the reason that they are attracted to Republicans is because when they look at many Democratic candidates, they look at the way that Democratic candidates have avoided immigration and avoided LGBTQ rights and in many ways historically avoided abortion access, right? Or shied away from attacking billionaire corruption, or not talking about the importance of housing, things that are common sense to a lot of Americans. Seriously, and what they see, what moderate voters see, is, well, listen, I look at a Democratic politician, they're not even willing to fight for the people that they supposedly care about. Why would they fight for me?
What a
That's
great
what it
point.
comes down to.
What a great point. Absolutely right. And also, I feel like Democrats are so afraid of. There's my dog. Sorry about that. Democrats are so afraid of offending somebody that they do nothing. Right? They're so
They wound up
terrified of
offending
offending.
everybody.
Yeah, they end up offending everybody. And I think back to the college protest and the Palestinian Israeli Palestinian conflict last year, and you had even the White House. Right? On the one hand, they kind of were like hiding, as opposed to coming out on one side or the other and saying either
Mhm,
we're going to side with this side or we're going to side with that side. I get that it's complicated, but you got to take a position. But they were so afraid of alienating Muslim voters in Michigan and Jewish voters elsewhere that they didn't do anything at all. And what ended up happening? Donald Trump ended up winning Dearborn,
mhm,
Michigan, and a record number of people in the Jewish community ended up either voting for Trump or not voting, certainly not voting
mhm.
for Harris, because both sides, you're like a grape, you're going to get squished if you're in the middle of the road. So, and this happens over and over and over again, where they're just constantly afraid of taking a position on anything for lack of offending, so that they do, is what you said, which is that they're afraid of doing that, and so therefore they end up offending everybody. And
Confidence is attractive.
yeah,
I would rather have an elected official who I don't personally like, who I may not want to have coffee with, who is very confident in their policy vision and knows what they want to do and executes it. My favorite president is Lyndon Baines Johnson. That was a problematic
that's
man
the
on
Texas
so
girl
many.
in you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Texas girl through and through.
all right.
Now, there are so many things that LBJ messed up, let me tell you. And there are we can talk about all the ways in which he was problematic. Don't get me wrong. But that man got shit done.
Oh yeah.
He did not wait. He did not hesitate. He focused on an issue and he's like, you know what? If you're not on board with me, you're against me. I'm getting this done. And people loved him for it. Even people who disagreed with him loved the fact that he would attack it. I think Nancy Pelosi shares a lot of that, shares a lot of similarities in that way.
Yeah.
I adore Nancy Pelosi. I understand a lot of people don't, whatever, but she is not the kind of person who shies away from a fight. When she was speaker, she would show up and say, "No, this is what we believe in, and you are wrong, and you are not looking out for working class families. I'm going to say that to your face, and then I'm going to go on cable news, and I'm going to say to the American people that you're trying to screw them over." People want to see that strength. They want to see fighters. They do. Now, unity is great. We should invite people in. We should have good conversations with people who disagree, but over all of that, voters want to see lawmakers and politicians who are going to fight for them and who are going to show up ready to battle against people who are engaging in bad
100%.
faith.
100%. And I think that's, you nailed it, because I think what's happening right now is that there's no fight and people are not they're not seeing any kind of fight, and you don't need to worry about policy. I mean, Donald Trump is giving Democrats a gift every single day, and rather
Mhm.
than chasing these disparate issues, right, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, abortion, trans issues, I mean, you could chase 20 different things a day. Ukraine, right?
Mhm.
Where's the overarching message,
Yep.
which these are all proof points of, right? But the one overarching message, I don't know what it is. Donald Trump is for they, them, being Elon Musk and the other oligarchs. Democrats are for you. Turn it around on them. Yeah, I just came up with that right now, but I don't know what that overarching mess. And then use
Yeah.
different metrics
Throw
to prove
spaghetti at
that,
the
right?
wall. See what sticks. See what
Yeah.
sticks.
Oh, I just
Do
almost sneezed.
something.
But yeah, and
You
and
know what I would have
so
done over the past 2 weeks with these Republican town halls, where Republican lawmakers were doing town halls and were getting shouted down by Republican voters who were upset over
yeah,
Doja or the VA being gutted or Social Security being attacked. And one Republican congressman walked out of his town hall. His staff pulled him because people were so irate. And these were
yeah,
not Democrats; these were Republican voters who were shouting at him. If I were Leader Hakeem Jeffries, I would have gone and scheduled a rally, or excuse me, a town hall in that same exact location the next day without hesitation. I would have filmed it. I would have invited every news crew I could, and I would have answered every question those Republican voters had. That is the strategy. That is how we get things done.
exactly. Exactly. And by the way, the other thing you're going to have to do, people who are watching, is if they're not doing town halls anymore, and by the way, the word has gone out not to do town halls anymore for
Yep.
Republicans because the excuse is these are all paid Democratic protesters. Yeah, okay, I think not. But if they don't do it, do your own town hall. Literally, get a few friends together, rent a VFW out. It's a couple $100. It's not prohibitive, or just get a big room
Mhm.
somewhere and invite your member of Congress and invite all your
Yeah.
neighbors. And if the member of Congress doesn't show up, do it anyway. Leave an empty chair. That's how
Yep.
you organize. That's how you rally. And by the way, if Democrats were smart, that's what they would be encouraging their state parties to do, to organize, to be able to do. But I don't see that happening. We can have a 5 hour discussion about this, and I know time is running out.
And can
But
we point something out really quickly?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
I know you have a lot of viewers who are not
yep,
necessarily active in politics or may not know how to organize, and they might be intimidated. They might say, well, I'm not qualified to organize a town hall, or I'm not qualified to run
yeah,
for
you are.
office, or I'm not qualified to write a position. Let me tell you something. It would shock you how much many elected officials and honestly some reporters don't know about politics and don't know about public policy issues. You are qualified because you are an American citizen, and it is your right to organize. It is your right to rally your community. It is your right to have good faith discussions and disagree with others. Just do it in a public library, do it at your VFW hall, if it's allowed, do it at a school gymnasium, and just invite everybody in your community. And it can be anything. If you want to talk about Social Security, if you want to talk about trans rights, if that's what you want to do, if you want to talk about our national security with these horrible attacks on Vladimir, excuse me, Mr. Zelensky in Ukraine,
Vladimir Zelensky, yep.
you are qualified. Get involved. Don't let anybody, cable news networks or the New York Times or any elected official tell you the absolute lie from hell that you are not qualified to get involved politically.
Guys, I'm telling you right now, I have spent 30 years working in politics, and I spent 20 years on TV. And I can promise you that 90% of the people that I worked with in both politics and TV are only there because they happen to be there, not because they have some massive qualification that makes them any more qualified than anybody walking down the street today. I mean, I really mean that.
Yep.
We all fake it till they make it, right?
Mhm.
You get the opportunity and you seize it and you see what works and what doesn't. I can tell you from my own personal experience, I launched a nonprofit along with my former Fox News colleague Gretchen Carlson
Yeah.
about 5 years ago. We didn't know the first thing about launching a nonprofit, and I promise you, we if we knew then what we knew now, I don't think we'd have the guts to do it because we didn't know what we didn't know, and
Yep.
and we did it. and it
Yep.
worked out. And we passed two big federal laws, and we're passing laws in state. So I say that because my whole life in Charlotte, I bet yours too, and I bet you everybody watching, your whole life, you just do it. Like this, like the Nike ad, you just do it. Just do
Yep.
it. The same way people, I can't run from here to like my bathroom right now. I'm so out of shape. But the way people who are actual runners start to become runners, they just put one foot in front of the other, and they become runners. They just and then they run a marathon eventually.
That's true.
And
That's true.
so, it's the same with Charlotte. What you're saying is so true because people just do it. Like look at your Nikes, look at the ad, and just take it to heart because I really think that that is kind of the mantra we all have to have. Because guess what? It's all up to us. They're not coming to save us. These guys in
No,
Washington. Obviously, it's been 6 months and they're still in a fetal position, worrying about offending somebody or other. So they're not doing anything about anything. They're just missing in action. I wish they
that's
were
right.
actually. I wish they were actually doing something poorly than what they're doing, which is nothing at all.
Yep.
Um, I want to be. I just want to acknowledge that we've been here for an hour and a half, and I cannot believe it's been that long. I am so grateful to you. Thank you, thank
Oh,
you, thank
thank
you,
you.
thank you to everybody who joined tonight, who had many other things they could be doing, but took the time to be with us tonight. Charlotte, I hope you come back. I hope this is the first of many because I think this is just so. What you said tonight was so inspiring and also so educational, and I truly hope people take any part of this conversation to heart, but especially the part about marginalized people everywhere because it's not just about one group or another. They're not going to stop until they shut us all down.
Yes, ma'am. And I just want to point out that I have, again, I have admired you for so long and all your great advocacy. And I'm glad that you and Jessica Tarlov and Pete Buttigieg are going on Fox News
Well,
to
not any.
talk
I
to
can't.
people
I
about.
can't go on Fox anymore. I
Oh, that's right. Sorry,
I
but
am precluded from going on Fox because I
but
sued
I'm
them. But yeah,
glad. But I'm glad you
but
did. I right.
yeah,
You know.
and Jesse Tarlov, who's a good friend, is doing a great job on the Five. Anybody who watches Fox, I know that most people probably don't watch Fox around here, but there are good people
Yeah.
over there who are carrying the banner incredibly well, and
Yes, they are.
she is chief among them.
Can we end on a
So
positive note?
yes,
This pendulum is going to swing back the other way, y'all. I promise you it
oh
will.
yes.
I promise. I'm not saying it's not going to be painful until then. It's going to be painful. We're about to go through a lot of we're about to go through a lot of dark moments. I'm not going to lie to you. But the pendulum is going to swing back, and there will be a backlash against Trump. The economy is going to fail, foreign policy is going to fail. There will be a backlash. So don't give up. Don't despair. Don't think that this is the end. This is not the end. It's very tedious and depressing and annoying, but it's not the end. We're gonna have that swing back coming, and we have to be ready. That's why we need our democratic leaders to have a plan in place for when that pendulum comes swinging back the other way.
And I wanted to say my favorite expression because I truly believe it with every fiber of my being. It's ascribed to Martin Luther King. He's not the one who said it, but everybody thinks it's his quote. The arc of the
Yeah,
moral
yeah.
universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I truly believe that. The arc of the moral universe is often very long, and it's certainly been long the last 10 years, but it will eventually bend towards justice. I don't know what it's going to take to excise this cancer from our body politic because that's what I feel it is, but it will. It will be
But we have
excised.
to be together.
So
That
we
is the
have to
one
be
thing that's
together.
essential. We have to be together. So
Yes. And just because we criticize our Democratic leaders, it's not because we don't
it's
like
because we
them. It's
love
because
them.
we want them to do a good job. And right now I
That's
don't
right.
feel there. Charlotte, thank you. Everybody who watched, hundreds and hundreds of you, thank you for tuning in. And Charlotte, I'm gonna drag you back here at some point, one way or the other, whether you like it or not. So there you
Yes,
go.
ma'am.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Julie, so
everybody.
much. You have a good night.
You too. Have a great night, everybody. Bye.